need to laugh, and when the sun is out.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your host for today's final plenary session. From her earliest days as a classroom teacher to her presidency of the United Federation of Teachers, and now as the president of the 1.6 million member American Federation of Teachers, Randi Weingarten is a tireless advocate for children, our public schools, and the teachers who sit at the center of democracy's greatest experiment. She is one of the founders of this conference and a leading voice on the need to raise the bar for entry into the profession. Her influence on education is worldwide, playing a key role in all 5 international summits on the teaching profession. The only time she has ever missed this conference was last year, when Education International asked her to join their delegation to the Ukraine, as that country was starting to come apart at the seams. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your host for this plenary session, Ms. Randi Weingarten.
Outside, and you're all in here. It's like the first really nice day in Washington, D.C., but that's who teachers are. This is what we do, and I am so delighted that we are all here this year. It is not an exaggeration to say that as I was walking in Kiev last year, and you were all here, you just felt that energy in the Ukraine. And it's just so nice to be here again with you. I wish the Ukraine was doing as well as the people in this room. So what are we talking about today? There's so much that's gone on and talked about in terms of teacher preparation that we wanted to spend an hour with some incredibly great people to not talk about sanctioning and hammering in terms of teacher preparation, but to really talk about what do new teachers need to know? What support do new teachers need so they feel competent and confident when they walk into classrooms? And let's move past, as I said before, this blaming and shaming that all of us have been through in the last few years. I mean, it's a little silly that I have to say that we're doing a little bit better than the Ukraine, given what the Ukraine is going through. So when it comes to what new teachers need to know, let's start with, obviously, what the people in the profession who have devoted their lives to helping children. Let's start with what you say they need to know. What you believe, what you have told me in tweets and emails and Facebook and in all the different places that I go. We know our kids need critical thinking, problem solving, and teamwork skills to compete in a 21st century knowledge economy. We know that we need to give teachers the skills, the support, and the resources they need to help every child get these skills. And we know that you just can't toss the keys to in a classroom or to a classroom to a new teacher and leave them without sufficient support or preparation to sink or swim. Frankly, not even Nike believes you just do it. But unfortunately, that's what happens even today in too many classrooms across the country. Classrooms where teachers feel a lot of challenges, particularly because half of our public school students in this country are poor. As a kindergarten teacher in New Mexico who has become a foster parent to 2 of her students who are homeless, said recently to the Washington Post, and I quote, "The job of a teacher has expanded to counselor, therapist, doctor, parent, attorney," and I suspect that everybody in this room can add a whole bunch of other names as well. It feels to me that new teachers need 3 things: high-quality preparation, induction and mentoring in their early years of teaching, and support and good PD opportunities throughout their careers. Let me just talk about them very quickly and then introduce our panel. Every teacher deserves high-quality teacher preparation and the support they need to feel competent and confident. I talk to my sister, who is an intensive care pediatrician, all the time about this, because look at how we prepare doctors versus how we prepare teachers. And we outline some of these ideas in our Raising the Bar report. I know it's not the Flexner report, but think about it. We have to have a well-grounded vision of effective teaching, and standards, education prep programs, and assessments have to all be aligned to that. It's not one size fits all, but it has to be aligned to that, not to regulations and not to test scores. Secondly, think about what we do. Doctors have all this clinical training. How much do we get? It's paid for by the government. What happens with us? We need to have that kind of training in lots of different diverse situations. And third, knowledge of the subject matter is just not enough. We have to have attention to cultural competency. Ultimately, we talk about this a lot, but the one thing that people outside of our profession don't do is they do not listen to practicing teachers and higher education professionals in this work. We should own our profession. Number two, preparation and support can't stop at the classroom door. You know this. New teachers should be inducted into the profession with intensive support, mentoring, and review from their experienced peers. Tell me, how many of you learn more your first, second, and third year than through, and this is not a slam on any preparation program, what did we learn our first, second, and third years? How many of you learn more your first, second, and third year than any time in teacher preparation programs, even in the best teacher preparation programs? And what really bothers me is every time we lose a teacher, it costs us, both morally and economically. More than 1/3 of our teachers leave the profession before they've taught 5 years, which costs more than $7 billion per year. But think about all that experience that goes out the door and all those dreams that go out the door. And last, every teacher deserves continuous support, professional development, and growth opportunities throughout their careers. A lot of you have talked about and have taught us about career ladders and things like that. And across the country, we, our union, is engaged in a conversation about how we create good jobs with real wages, with fair wages, good benefits, and a real voice that creates a pathway to middle class. Shouldn't the teaching profession get that as well? Just wondering if you were listening. So that's what we're trying to do. Preparation, what it really means, what do we really need to do, continuous growth, induction, and what does it mean to be a real profession? So it's not just because you want to make a difference in the lives of kids. You should get the respect and dignity you deserve for doing the most important work in America. And with us today to actually help talk about these kind of this kind of work are 3 panelists who know more about this than almost anyone I can imagine. I'm so delighted they were with us today. And so I'm going to ask them to join on the stage as soon as I call their name. Linda Darling-Hammond, the Charles E. Dukeman Professor of Education at Stanford University, where she started the Stanford Center for Opportunity Policy and Education. Among her many publications and accomplishments, Linda led the panel that produced one of the most influential education reports in the last 25 years, What Matters Most, Teaching for America's Future, Linda Darling-Hammond. Sharon Robinson has been the president and the CEO of the American Association of Colleges for Teacher Education since 2005. And you think I get every single day criticized. This woman is my hero. Sharon's lifelong civil rights activism and advocacy for educational opportunity has been evident throughout her career, including her work at our sister union, the NEA. Thank you, Sharon, very much for everything. And you just heard from our third panelist, so let's bring up Terry Holliday because he needs no introduction because of his distinguished career as an educator and a public official. Thank you very much, Terry, and thank you for all of you to be here today. Now I get to be Oprah. Is this mic on now? Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. I'm going to start. I've never been able to do this. I was so excited about doing this today that I get to ask the questions. So, I'm going to start with Linda, but this question could go for anyone. What do beginning teachers, Linda, really need to know and be able to do in order to teach their students responsibly from the first day of their job? And if you want to continue, what do you think they need to become, growing and more effective?
Well, as you already said, you can't learn to teach just in a pre-service program. So you have to think about what do you need to learn to be ready on day one, to be a reasonable teacher, and then to continue that journey. Obviously, at the heart, you need to understand your children and who they are, how people learn, how different students may learn differently, how they learn in a social, cultural context. So there's all of that wonderful work on learning, which we know more and more about. You need to know the content you're going to teach in a way that is flexible and that identifies the big ideas and helps you make that content accessible to students who will learn in different ways. And then you need to know how to create a classroom community, a safe, collaborative classroom community in which students are learning to be good colleagues to each other, good partners, good members of a social community, becoming personally and socially responsible, and able to teach and learn with each other. All of those things are kind of at the core. Obviously, in the United States today and in most countries today, thinking about all those things from the perspective of students who are diverse, who come from different countries, language backgrounds, social, cultural backgrounds is a part of that, and who learn in a wide range of ways. And then, to be able to continue to get better, I think of Paulo Freire's work on how you learn to look, listen to, and understand children. Because every class will be new. And the biggest job of a teacher is to learn from her students about who they are and how they learn, as well as to enable them to learn. And that's an ongoing study. It's an ongoing process. And to do that, it's both having those tools of a two-way pedagogy. It's collaborating with colleagues and knowing how to learn from your colleagues because nobody can know it all. And it's having a capacity to access resources in the school and beyond the school.
Thank you. Sharon and Terry, do you want to take this question on too? Sharon first.
Well, when I think about this question, just picking up on Linda's last point, I often describe a beginning teacher and really a very advanced teacher as a conspicuous learner. You model learning for your students as you are learning more about them, more about how to make connections with the curriculum objectives and the content that help to achieve those objectives. As the teacher learns learns more about her strengths, his strengths, and their weaknesses, so you know how to leverage and engage in a larger professional community. I think those are the attributes of a teacher that is always going to be determined to find a way to help students make those connections.
Great, thank you. Terry.
Well, they need to be able to leap tall buildings in single bounds and faster than a speeding bullet. And this was our challenge. Well, I've been involved in 2 recent events that kind of tried to put some meat on these bones. The CCSSO, our responsibility, our promise, we tried to define what a a student-ready teacher would be. And you know, we could go about 30 minutes on this. So it really is superhuman powers. And we just don't know, how to get all that done. With the other effort I was involved in, and you were involved in, Randy, the CAPE accreditation standards, how to clearly define what we expect teacher prep to provide to make sure they're ready. So, we just need to put it down and start working toward it and keep supporting those teachers through a clinical model, which is diagnose, prescribe, and teachers got to have a lot of tools in their belt.
It's interesting to hear the different perspectives from people who are working in different angles of this. And that actually leads me to, this is the question that I've wanted to ask for the last several days. So you'll have to excuse me for being a tad bit political in this question. And Terry, I'm going to start with you, and then I'm going to go to Sharon, which is that the U.S. Department of Education recently proposed new teacher preparation regulations that were not very well received. When I say that, I mean that most of us thought that they didn't really do what we needed them to do to actually help prepare teachers and actually help the institutions. So, how's that for trying not to be political? Yet, there's still an appetite, as Terry just said, for new policy tools to help drive changes in teacher preparation in a productive, constructive way. So, if the department's regulations were the wrong answer, what would some better ideas be for federal and state policy initiatives to support teacher preparation and the teacher profession?
Well, I've never backed away from a political statement, so I would say the last thing we probably need is more regulations. The profession needs to handle this. I did feel with the Commission on Accreditation of Educator Preparation, the merging of NCAID and TIAC, that we were able to start fleshing this out. Now, the challenge is going to be, just like anything else, the implementation, because if all of a sudden you say, yeah, we got to have higher recruitment standards. Well, what does selectivity really mean? Is it the average of the average? Is it every individual student? You see, the implementation will be the challenge. And then the content-specific language, the diagnose, prescribe. We'll get into this vast array of too many programs doing too many different things and not doing any of them well. So what we really need is the profession to police itself on this with preparation standards, accreditation, and what the political statement I would make is we are not coming together very well. And I think we need to back up a little bit, and if we don't come together a little better on this, then we'll end up with regulations, which I don't think anybody really wants.
Sharon, I mean, you think about, look, we're all here with the Board of Professional Teaching Standards, which was not based on anything but us coming together collectively and voluntarily to create this great arc that we are, that we've been with for years and years and years, to Terry's point.
And having experienced that journey to create and realize the benefits of the National Board, I'm more committed than ever to applying that same principle of professional consensus to implement standards of self-governance and self-regulation to ed preparation. And we could certainly use the support of the federal government to help us in creating the kind of partnerships that are essential to the clinical development of new teachers. And as we move rapidly from a process of placing student teachers to a process of partnership where the School of Education is really integrally engaged in the educational goals for the students there, and they bring their novice practitioners, their candidates to be teachers, to become a part of that delivery system. My ideal would be for every candidate to experience real practice in a school that is deliberately trying to get better, that is improving its productivity on student learning, and have the new teacher be a part of that kind of culture as they learn to be a practitioner, because the likelihood is they will always land in a school that is or should be in a process of trying to get better. So I think as we can assure through a number of means the mastery of content, whether it's content about pedagogy or content in an individual discipline, it's the application of that content to result in student learning that we've really got to focus on. And that must happen in a real, authentic arena of clinical development where those skills are nurtured with guided reflection, and in a way that will not result in doing any harm to the students, because they're on their way. This is their one life to live as well. So we need to create these settings where new teachers can learn, but not at the expense of student learning outcomes that are the primary goal of any given school.
Clinical, 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 clinical.
Yeah,
Linda.
but it takes partnerships.
And it takes some guts. Like Terry and Sharon, I'm very impatient to get to a place where what our best teacher education programs becomes the norm, and we're far from that still. And we've struggled to get accreditation to do that job, but schools get accredited that teachers will tell you they went through and didn't get all that they needed. And we've got to move the dime on many things. I understand an aspect of the federal notice of proposed rulemaking. This may be inside baseball, but what Randy meant was that there were about 4,000 comments on these rules, and about 3,900 of them were negative, and I think there were a few that were positive. Most of them, there was some positive aspect, though, of what they were trying to do. I chair the California Commission on Teacher Credentialing, and we're trying to do some of the things that the federal government in those rules was suggesting. We're trying to get survey data from graduates of teacher education programs, because we think the consumers can tell us, did they get what they needed to be able to do what they needed to do in the classroom. Data from employers about how well graduates were prepared, so that we can begin to leverage real changes. Data in California on performance assessments of beginning teachers, because we've had 10 years of national board-like portfolios for beginning teachers, which tell us whether people can plan a curriculum and teach it and be ready to analyze student learning and move forward. What the negative comments were primarily about was the idea of teaching, attaching test-based evaluations of teachers to then teacher education, both because the practice of evaluating teachers based on student test scores has been found in many growing numbers of studies to be very unreliable, very unstable, and biased against teachers who teach kids who are already high and low achieving. That knowledge base grows constantly. I just wrote a commentary in a volume of The Educational Researcher coming out soon with 5 articles that document more of the flaws with these metrics, which many of us were hopeful about a few years ago, but which we've discovered cannot account for all of the other influences on student learning. So I think we want the right metrics to leverage improvement. We want things like performance assessments that are a learning tool, not just an evaluation tool. And then we have to get to the final issue around clinical practice. I've been fortunate to be a teacher educator in 2 institutions where candidates got a full year of clinical practice typically under the wing of an expert urban teacher who really knew what needed to be done, linked to coursework that was very practice-based and connected to the work that was going on in the classroom. And graduates of those programs say, I was well prepared to teach. So we know how to do this, but how many programs do that? Not enough. We have to get serious about what clinical practice means. It means a full year of practice in a high-quality context where people are helping you learn to teach, where the very best teachers are joined together to build the profession, and where the program that the university provides is tightly connected and linked and practical in every respect. Let's be clear about what that is. Let's not say, well, maybe you can do it in 2 weeks, or maybe you can do it in, a day and a half, or maybe you can have one practicum session on English learners and say you're prepared, because we put all of that stuff under the rug and we don't call it out. So teachers want us to call it out.
So should we, let me just push us on this a little bit. Should we do what is done in medicine, which is no one actually can walk into the practice unless they have that kind of clinical experience. And then as I say that, then the question also becomes who pays for it. In medicine, medicine is very much, even though people pay a lot of money for medical schools, it's subsidized hugely by the government through Medicaid and Medicare. So then the other question becomes who pays for it, and the third question is then what happens when we have the teacher shortages that somebody would undoubtedly say we have. So should we require what Stanford and what Teachers College have always done and done brilliantly?
Well, I think we do need the federal government to do as it does in medicine. Basically, the third-party payer system funds teaching hospitals, and we should have every teacher prepared in a teaching school that is designed like a teaching hospital to be the place where you learn best practice from people who really know it. And we should have federal funding for that. And we should do what all of the high-achieving countries do, which is completely fund the preparation of every single person who goes into teaching. And I want to remind us that in 2008, now President Obama said, while campaigning, if you will teach, we will pay for your education. And that promise we still need to work on, because in Singapore and Finland and Canada and Australia and you name it, if you will teach, they pay for your education. And also give you a stipend so you can live while you're getting the training. Rather than saying, we dare you to become a teacher, you will go into debt to go into a profession that will pay you less than other professions. And by the way, get as much training as you feel you can afford, or none at all if that's better for you. We really can't.
Wait, and then we'll devalue you.
Right, and then we'll devalue you. And we'll say we don't trust you, because we can't have a profession that's going to be trusted to make its own decisions if we don't ensure that everyone comes in with the very best possible access to the knowledge base that we have. So I think we need to be very assertive about a federal role, which in all high-achieving countries is played in this regard, and the states need to take this seriously as well. If we prepared every teacher well, the payoff, the return on that investment in terms of staying in teaching, because we would not lose people, the attrition rate for prepared teachers is about 19%. The attrition rate for unprepared teachers is about 50%, and the average is about 33%. If we prepare people, they will stay. If they stay, they will become more effective. If they're more effective, children will learn better. If they learn better, we will have fewer costs for grade retention, special education, dropout, incarceration. At the end of the day, it will pay for itself.
Oh my God, you just talked about a virtuous cycle. Terry and Sharon.
Could it be that we could have a more efficient and effective system of preparation? If we look at all of our foreign counterparts that we're trying to constantly compare ourselves to, they tend to focus a little more with more specialized teaching universities. We've got per population, you know, hundreds of times more teacher preparation programs. So are we certain that that's the best delivery model? I don't know, but we should consider it and look at it. And one of the things that ought to put you either in the game or out of the game is the ability to deliver on the clinical that Linda was talking about. What's amazing to me is we all agree. We just all agree all across the board. You know, nothing controversial here. Every meeting I've been at for the last 3 years to talk about this, we all agree, but we're not getting anything done.
So, you know, one of the things that, Terry, to that point,
Don't
to that
you
very
worry.
point.
I'm getting back to that question.
Right. So the federal government then would rather mandate that you have more testing for value add than get about the business of being able to really operationalize a process that informs the decision at the state level as to should this program have the privilege of recommending candidates for licensure. So I think we owe the public the responsibility to inform your thinking in that regard at the state level, certainly about the candidate's readiness to practice, and we've tried to do that in creating a nationally available assessment for licensure. We owe the public feedback, reliable feedback on program quality through an accreditation system, and we're trying to do that with CAPE. And now I think what we need from the federal government and state governments is some willingness to work with us to act on that information. There's some programs that probably will have to close if we say, as we do, that a rich clinical experience is a modern day requirement of a quality program. And I'm not talking about 5 weeks of student teaching or reliable placements with your friends who are in, you know, a network of schools. We're talking about a relationship between the university and the school district that is one of mutual commitment to the goals of both developing a labor pool for that school district, a supply of quality teachers, and a commitment to the student achievement goals of that community.
Yeah, I'll be the first to admit that many of our K-12 systems are very inefficient also, because it's not right the way some teacher prep candidates are assigned for clinical practice. I've seen principals just who happen to be free that day, you know, or who happen to be walking up the hall. So you got a teacher candidate this time. What we've got to have is more principals dedicated to providing those teachers who commit to clinical practice, to provide them with the time and the resources, and to make sure the best of the best is training these teachers.
Absolutely.
Which actually, I think, Terry, you bring up another, because as all three of you are talking, and I was, you know, Terry's point before that we are very, there's, in the practice, there's pretty universal agreement on a lot of what you've all said already, and what I said in my introductory remarks. But the point that Terry said about we have that agreement, but it just doesn't get done. In some ways, just like with pre-K education, we have that agreement, but it doesn't get done. And so maybe, as you were talking about, maybe we also have to make sure that there's some incentives for a receiving school and for a principal, because my next question is maybe, how do we take it from the rhetoric that we all believe in to a reality if we think that the way in which the federal government just did, or the Department of Education just did with the proposed regulations, didn't quite do it? How is California doing it? What should we do, for example, in terms of maybe the receiving schools, in terms of clinical work? Maybe we need to create some incentives so that it's not one more pull on a principal who's already doing, you know, a gazillion things, and, you know, educators who are doing a gazillion and one things.
You know, we have a couple of really important programs, both federally and in some states, that we've been fighting to keep alive for many years. The Teacher Quality Partnerships program. Some of you are probably running programs that are associated with that have these relationships between schools and universities and do provide funding for the wonderful work of cooperating teachers and mentor teachers and so on. That needs to become a much bigger part of the landscape. In California, we're just bringing new money in the system. You might remember we were on the brink of collapse or bankruptcy a few years ago, but our governor has brought in new revenue sources to build in some of those things. But we're also going to get very tough on accreditation. And we are overhauling accreditation so that we will have a combination of data about whether candidates and employers think folks are well prepared and whether they go into teaching and stay in teaching and whether they can pass a performance assessment and so on, with a different approach to accreditation where rather than just collecting hundreds and thousands of pages of paperwork and kind of weeding through this and having visits every 5 years, we're going to target in on places where the data says to us, very much like a dashboard in K-12, where the data says there's trouble in River City. And we'll go in and try to be helpful, but we'll also be very clear. If we don't see the improvements in the outcomes, then we're going to be looking to encourage those universities to do something different with their resources than misprepare teachers.
Education, a $600 billion industry. We spend more per pupil than anybody except maybe Luxembourg. Are we sure that we're spending it well? What happens, you've got this constant debate. Recently I testified in front of the Senate Help Committee about ESEA reauthorization. I'm not a Democrat, I'm not a Republican.
Everybody know what ESEA is?
Elementary and Secondary
Education Act.
Yeah,
I was actually at a school meeting yesterday
in
Brooklyn, and people just looked at me because they know it as No Child Left Behind.
So you've got the debate, hundreds of programs and the title programs that go to states with very strict guidelines, regulations. And then you got some state chiefs who say, well, we really don't want those regulations because we'd much rather sit down with our Title II dollars and our Title I dollars, and we'd much rather work with teacher preparation programs to start doing some of these things. But then you got other chiefs who say, oh, please tell me what to do, that way I can just tell them this is the way it is, and I don't have to engage in the dialogue. And then you've got, certain political leaders who they say, well, if we give money to the states, we can't trust them to do the right thing. They've been doing the wrong thing for 50 years, so what makes us think they'd do anything well now? So you see this constant friction with trying to put things together in a systemic way to take the dollars available and to do a much better job in doing what we already all agree on, because program approval, licensure, data, all of that is a state responsibility. Federal gives us a little bit of money through the title programs, but no major dollars go. It's mainly tuition and state budget dollars that go into providing teacher prep programs.
So as we're talking about things like data, accreditation, and things like that, I know that, and I see it in my own union because we represent a lot of teacher educators. In fact, the report we did on raising the bar was half the committee was K-12, pre-K-12, and half the committee were was higher ed educators. And it was a really interesting discussion in terms of people thinking about how do we solve this problem from both perspectives without either perspective feeling that we were bashing anybody. So the question I have to ask you is probably a question that many of you in the audience are thinking, so what's the role of teacher voice in this? How do you make sure there's, a meaningful role, both in terms of the K-12 teacher, the pre-K-12 teacher, as well as the teacher educator in many of the institutions that educate our candidates right now?
I really appreciate that question, Randy, because I've been thinking about how important it is for us to first see each other as colleagues. Colleagues because we practice based on shared knowledge. We don't all know the same discipline, but we're all focused on how to support learning in ourselves and in those students that come to us to fulfill their aspirations. And so I think we've got to begin to start seeing each other as a unified profession. Some of us work in P-12 classrooms, some of us work in higher ed classrooms, some of us do research, some of us do professional development, and some of us work in a blended environment. And that should be really encouraged and appreciated and respected across the board. So I think that we've got to really kind of leap over perhaps years of tradition where there might have been some, there was a hierarchy assigned to these roles that was not really necessary and not really useful to us as a professional community. So, it concerns me greatly when I look at the tension that you'll see every year in state legislatures between higher ed and K-12 in the budgeting process that you often see develop, because we should see ourselves as having first a mutual interest, because the enterprise must work together if it's going to work at all. And that's not necessarily a philosophical answer. It's a practical political answer. We've got to start working together to advance the standards that we want to live by.
Lee Shulman coined the term some years ago, wisdom of practice, which we talked about as the national board was being created, was how do you take the wisdom of great teachers and bottle that and learn from it and bring it into the standards along with the wisdom from research and blend those. And that's really part of what the challenge is. The ideal that we had in mind in those days, and it's becoming actualized in some places, is that teachers would become board certified, they would move through their careers, they would continue to engage in teaching and other hybrid roles. Some of them would move into teacher education, and we'd have a practitioner base in higher education as well, and that there would be this walking back and forth between the wisdom of research, the wisdom of practice, and many people engaging in both. That is happening in some places. And I think we need to hold that vision as the future of the profession.
A real integrated and aligned approach.
Just one quick thing, this is overused, but it's so core to me that we do this work with teachers rather than to teachers. And that when we wanted to look at implementing state law to put new standards, assessment, accountability in place, we called first our teachers and our professors together. When we wanted to build a new teacher effectiveness system, we called our teachers to lead that effort. The most underutilized resource in this nation are the people in this room, national board certified teachers. We have got to figure out a way to move our career ladders and to provide more teacher leader opportunities, because you're not going to save this profession through a bunch of state chiefs who have gray hair. You're going to save this profession with the people sitting out there in those seats.
I think we could all say hallelujah
Amen.
to them, but we want you around for a little while longer.
Hallelujah to that.
So, but as I'm looking at the time clock, and we have gone through 30 minutes in about a minute and a half, I'm going to ask one last question, which is, I know none of us have a magic wand, but if we had a magic wand, and if we had all the wherewithal to get anything done, so what is it? What would be the first 2 changes? You could go up to 3, but what could be the first 2 changes you would say, this is what I want to do?
Well, I'm thinking back to when Connecticut did its major reform of teaching back in the 80s and 90s, which really propelled that state forward. And so I would do some of the things that they did. First wish with my magic wand would be to raise and equalize teachers' salaries so that they were first in the nation as they did and equal across districts. So that we could, assure people that they were coming into a profession where they could make a good living and where you didn't have to compete poor districts against rich districts to get good teachers. That's number one. Then I would do what they did number two, which is raise the standards and expectations for schools of education so that they do provide high quality preparation with strong clinical preparation, ensuring that people have strong content pedagogical knowledge, know how to teach diverse learners, have that literacy training and so on. So when they come into the classroom, they're really prepared to do what they want to do. And this is a particular passion of mine because I entered the profession through an alternative route as an intern where I got a little bit of student teaching, so-called in the summer by myself. I didn't really have a master teacher. They called it student teaching. It's do-it-yourself student teaching. And then you're on your own in the fall while you take some courses at the university. So I'm very passionate about the fact that the grown-ups in the system, which is us now, guess what? We're the grown-ups, should be sure that every teacher gets what they need and want to be highly effective. So that would be number two. And then the third thing I would do, I know I've got big wishes.
That's okay. I love that.
Is ensure that these partnerships with schools are created where we can build the profession together between teaching schools that really wrap around learning for veteran teachers and beginning teachers are places where we can conduct research and learn more and spread expertise so that the whole basis of the profession is each one teach one, that we're always teaching and we're always learning.
Thank you.
In a nutshell.
Okay, Sharon.
So I'm going to take my magic wand and begin with the last thing that Linda mentioned and just make that a teacher preparation or educator preparation enterprise that is clinically based, that is always done in a setting where the novice candidates will experience state-of-the-art practice and a way to be highly accountable to each other as a professional community, in that we don't hide our mistakes, we intervene quickly to correct any aberrant impact that we might have had on student learning, so that we're always trying to help that student get to the learning outcomes that bring them to us. And we really commit ourselves to that. But that would mean that this is a setting where a wide range of practices is possible and supported by the materials and the knowledge that you would find there to be applied to the interest of students. And every teacher would experience a really extended period of guided learning to be a practitioner in a setting like that. And from that setting, we would identify the significant problems of practice that would get assigned to only the most well-endowed and rigorous research centers throughout the country that would come together every 3 years for consensus panels on these problems of practice. So it would be an environment in which the teacher is really aware that they are building and using and contributing to a knowledge base that is organic, that is essential, and that is shared within this community.
Nice. Sounds a lot like what the medical profession has done.
Exactly.
Stop the teacher bashing, restore the profession. And if I had a really honking magic wand,
Absolutely, go for it.
I would cure poverty so teachers could focus on sparking and igniting learning rather than basic needs.
Terry, we may actually give you the union card too.
I'm sorry, what was that question?
So I'm going to just do something I almost never do, which is there's lots of different things. These three people are, just amazing, as you all know. So I'm going to just ask one last question, which is there anything else that you want to say to this wonderful audience before we close on this Friday night or on this Friday afternoon, in terms of people who have spent their lives really dedicating themselves to helping children succeed, but to also help being so amazing in their own practice? And I want to just say, before I turn this over to the three of these wonderful professionals, this is who the practice should be. And I just can't thank you enough for all the work that you do each and every day for our kids and for making and elevating the practice of teaching. Thank you. So, any last comments to this audience?
I would want to just say, I know all good teachers are continually challenging themselves and self-critiquing, and how did that lesson go, and did I reach that child, and what about Johnny, and can I take care of Sylvia, and there's all of this that goes on. And so I want to say, take care of yourself also. Find a space where you can center. When you self-critique and you get discouraged because your standards are so high and you care so deeply about each of those kids, be forgiving to yourself. Be mindful that there are others you can reach out to. Build the community, build your resources. Take a moment and take care of yourself, because the world will not be perfect in our lifetimes. For every momentary disappointment, there will be a new day. It is always darkest before the dawn. And you just need to always nurture your own capacity to get up that next morning and to do all of the wonderful work you do for so many children.
Sharon.
Well, that's a lovely question and challenge, Randy. First, I would say thank you from the bottom of my heart for the dedication to this work that keeps you learning, that keeps you growing, that keeps you going back day after day. And the next thing I'd want to say is in those moments when you might feel a bit discouraged, you know, and just embrace the power that you have you are the engine of our economy. And so much depends on you, and it begins where you are every day. I learned from a student, I listened to him very closely, and he said his best advice to everybody was to do all you can with what you have in the place that you are and in the time that you have. So I just ask that you remember that. That's a special challenge, because so very much depends on you.
And Terry.
Just remember that teaching is all about delayed gratification. If you're an elementary teacher, you know that it feels really good to get to go to the bathroom at the end of the day. But just remember that you're not going to see the fruits of your labor quickly every day. It may be years before you see the fruits of your labor. Some of the stories that I told you earlier, that as adults, they come back and say, you made a difference in my life, and I would not be where I am today without you. So keep the good fight. That's the main thing. Thank you.
So I want to one more time thank this wonderful panel of people who are my personal heroes, Linda Darling-Hammond, Sharon Robinson, and Terry Holliday. Thank you very, very much.